Everybody, how are you guys doing? How are you guys feeling? Hey y'all. Now I gotta talk about the new season of Gina and Georgia. It's season 3. And this is where, Georgia ends up going to jail. Now I've been thinking a lot about this, and honestly I need to say it loud before I do anything else on YouTube. Okay, I really got to break this down, that Georgia is just a mother. Okay, that's just how I feel about Georgia. I'm not gonna argue with nobody. Argue with like your kids, argue with your mother, argue with your friends, don't argue with me. Georgia is just a mother. Okay,
overprotective mothers were once underprotected daughters, so she became the protector she never had.
She's the woman of the hour, and I think it's very important to talk about her and just center this video around her. So this is my Georgia video. Okay,
Motherhood.
now I gotta be real, right? Even though Georgia did some truly horrible things, and yeah, some might say that she was a monster, I couldn't help but think about, who raised her. Like, you don't just pop up out of nowhere like that, It's trauma passed down. And this season, hints at, the Queen Georgia and, her past and all the things that she's been facing, Stuff like her mother's boyfriend, It was confusing at first, especially since, like, the last season.
My secrets are to protect you.
We kind of met someone who looked like her mom, but I think that was like her sister,
I don't know that feeling. Because after you left, he started doing it to me.
The whole money situation happened last season. But here's the thing. Georgia's parents, the people who raised her, were real, like the real monsters. And Georgia, well, she's a product of that, kind of like what's going on with Gina, right? Jenny, I'm sorry. I keep saying Gina, but her name is Jenny. But yes, we have to talk about that, right? If I'm being honest, Georgia should have been, preparing her kids. She should be preparing her kids for what's going to happen in season 4. The drama that's coming in season 4. The family stuff, the past, catching up to them, Instead, they're blindsided. And they're going to be blindsided. And I see like Jenny as kind of like a Georgia 2.0 or 2.5. She's carrying some of the same weight, dealing with family secrets and trauma, that Georgia kind of dealt with, Now, let's talk about the men in Georgia's life, okay? The dad of her 2 kids, one of them grew up with Georgia, Zion, and it seemed like he really cares about Georgia. They have this complicated history, but here's what frustrates me. Just about him, like he acts like he didn't know about the abuse Georgia went through or the danger, just their daughter was facing, right? And honestly, that's on him, in my opinion. He was working multiple jobs and living his own life while Georgia was struggling to hold everything down as a single mom. If he really cared, he could have stepped up, financially, emotionally. Instead, he chose to look the other way. And now, all of a sudden he's the victim, and that's just crazy. That's not accountability, in my opinion. Like all this, oh, Georgia did this and Georgia did that. But you didn't care. You didn't care to check up on your kids. You just trusted that they were living somewhere else and you were happy and just comfortable. If it wasn't going to be Georgia, he was going to dash those kids off. Well, his kid, because Jenny, was his kid. He was going to drop her off to his mom. Somebody else would have been raising his kid. Point blank, period. He was never going to take on the responsibility.
You think I'm the evil parent, not like Dad. I see you guys looking at each other. Oh, Mom's crazy. She's evil, right? That's why you ran away to Daddy. It's not fair. I'm the one who sacrificed everything. You could judge me all you want, but I was there. Where was he when it was just you and me and we had nothing? Oh, he was off in exotic places living his best life, but not me. Not evil Mom, huh? Where are you, Zion?
And I get that Georgia, had to do some hard things to protect her kids, right? Single mothers know this struggle. There's no warning, no guidebook. When someone threatens your child or abuses you, you learn to survive however you can. And this is why I don't think that, she's this horrible monster like other people tend to believe that she is. Like sometimes things happen, Sometimes it's like, okay, I get it. I get why you had to do that.
You have no idea how lucky you are to have me. I'd kill for you. I'd actually kill for you. Let that sink in. That's not nothing.
And, that means being a mother sometimes means making choices that aren't easy to accept, like probably hurting someone who was dangerous. Like the guy, her husband, who did what he did, what was trying to touch Jenny, we're going to get into that conversation and really speak about that, okay?
You want to know why I did it? I don't know that I ever felt I had another option.
Now, speaking of that, let's talk about just some real conversations or like a real situation. I want to talk about Tom Fuller, the man Georgia was arrested for potentially killing.
Betrayal, disillusionment, worry, anger, red hot anger, rage.
Like, the wife basically begged Georgia to help take her away from the family pain, the husband pain, all of that. She begged for help to take away all that stress, take away her suffering and take away her husband's suffering. He was terminally ill and suffering, so he was putting a lot on the family, on that son, on just everybody. It was a lot, the medical bills was a lot. So I get why Georgia did that. It probably was a harsh thing, but she did it for all the right reasons,
Because that's the job. That's what I do. Because if I don't do that, y'all don't eat.
It kind of makes me think of Power and makes me think of Raquel and how she ended up, taking her mother off the breathing stuff that was keeping her alive when she was struggling with cancer. She took her mother out of her misery. Sometimes somebody has to take on that hard decision, for the betterment of everybody, and sometimes it's not as easy. She took on that weight of taking somebody's life in a way to protect the people around. And you would think that the wife would understand that because she basically complained to Georgia, but no, she tried to blame Georgia for all of this. And I just didn't understand that, okay? I'm not saying it was right, but I get it. Georgia did some things, that shortened his pain and his suffering, and it was mercy. I think that it was not malice. She was trying to help out a family that was breaking. I wish somebody or anybody thought of it in that manner. They're looking at her as a vicious killer when that wasn't the point. It was the motive behind it. She had good reasons to do what she did, And I also want to talk about, her unaliving her ex-husband, Kenny. One of the biggest things folks forget is why she poisoned her ex-husband, Kenny. Like, this man was being inappropriate with her daughter, Jenny. He crossed the line, and Georgia didn't wait around, for it to get worse. She just, took him out instantly. And I think that he deserved it, because if you're going to touch my daughter, you're going to violate my daughter, I'm not going to wait for you to keep doing it each and every day. No, it's bye. Because no, why did you think you could do that? Now, I'm not saying that, that was the right way to go, but I understand, like, as a mom, when someone touches your child or threaten their safety, you do what you got to do. You have to, like, protect your child by any means necessary. You're not just going to stand there and let someone hurt your baby. You're not going to let somebody hurt your child. So I get it. I get why she did what she did. Now, let's not forget, the stepfather. Georgia mama's married this man, Ed, I believe his name is Ed Atkins, I think. And he was, like, abusing her physically. And I think the SA was happening as well. She was just 14 and nobody was protecting her. So she protected herself. She shot, I think she was about to shoot him. No, she did shoot him. She shot him in the hand and ran. That's not extreme. There was conversations as far as Zion saying that he felt as though that she was going to unalive him for doing the things that he did. And where I get that, but it was survival, in my opinion. I think that she had to do what she had to do because this man was a horrible person. I'm sorry, I keep thinking of things like that. And let's not forget Gil, right? Then you got Gil, Austin's father, the white man, the white baby daddy.
Gil's pissed that I put him in jail and he wants money.
He was another one who tried to, like, flip the narrative like he was the victim. No, sir. He was abusive physically and emotionally. And on top of that, he was doing, like, shady stuff, stealing money, through fraud. Georgia used that to get him, locked up and keep him away from her and her kids. Because, like we seen in season 3, he was physically trying to hurt Jenny. And I'm sure he would have, like, turned on Austin as time went by if Austin didn't agree with him, I've
got a lot of demons, a lot of nightmares in my past. And I had a choice. I could live in the past, drown in it, feel it every day, be there. But you have to live for the future, because the past will eat you. There's more to life than that, hell.
Like, she wasn't sitting around waiting to be saved. She knew the system wasn't going to protect her. So she did what she had to do, and that's the part people ignore. Georgia was never, given safety. So she created it, even if it meant getting blood on her hands, I think, to protect her sanity, her safety, her and her children. She did what she had to do. And I want to talk about Paul. And I know she didn't really go do anything intense to Paul, but I think it's worth discussing. Georgia supported Paul during his, mayor run and everything, Georgia was deeply involved in Paul's campaign, organizing community events, just completely smoothing over political drama like the casino night in season 1, and just supporting him through key moments. But she just did all that she could do, she had like this built-in image. She rode to victory, by projecting stability, competence, and just community. She just was the reason this man won. And Paul just completely switched on her. Paul publicly divorced Georgia during her trial after Georgia was accepting or excused. She accepted him and excused, all the things. Like, let's just keep it honest. He fell short. He wasn't good enough to be mayor. But she accepted him, and excused him not being ready and made sure he was ready, made sure he won, After Georgia was accused of murdering Tom Fuller, Paul publicly distanced himself, moved out, and even divorced her, in the middle of the trial.
Everything I wanted was right there, and you were offering it to me. And I took it, and I'm so sorry.
I gotta get out of here.
All in an effort to savage, his political image. He blamed Georgia for running and ruining his life, ignoring that, she had supported him for more than he ever protected her. She gave him something he wasn't willing to give back to her. And for me, that's a coward. And I think Paul recall was a outlook of that. People saw him as not being loyal. People saw that he did not have loyalty. People felt like if you're going to divorce your wife and walk away from your wife during this sensitive time to where she needed you, what will you do to us? And he showed them that he's able to do that. When all the stuff happened,
I'm not proud of how I got us here, but I'm proud I got us here. I never said I was a good person. You're my mom. I need to believe you're a good person.
The whole thing about the different businesses coming to town and stuff, and how that was affecting the town, he went against the better interest of the town. And they were like, oh yeah, this man is not loyal. So I think that is good riddance that he lost the mayor, because at the end of the day, he gained being mayor by Georgia. And now he's lost being mayor for abandoning Georgia. And then all of a sudden he wants to blame Georgia for everything. No, take accountability. Most men don't know how to take accountability. And I think that was the biggest thing with this season, is the lack of accountability.
You turned me into the worst possible version of myself because you are insidious. And you poison good things.
Just the lack, okay? Paul deserved to be recalled. The only reason he even got the votes in the first place was because of Georgia. She was the real force behind his win. She made him look good, showed up for him, and held everything together. But once he had the power, he left her when she needed him the most. The recall is happening because Paul started to believe his own hype. He began to think that he was the man all on his own.
I didn't make you anything that wasn't in there already.
But the truth is, he was only that man because of Georgia. Without her support and guidance, he would have always been the same selfish person he showed himself to be, And I just think that that's why the recall needed to happen. That's why it's good riddance for him. Now, listen, Georgia's not perfect, but she's not a villain either. She's the product of trauma, of abuse, of always having to figure it out with no help. Every man in her life either hurt her or failed, to show up. And when that happens, you start just moving different. You start protecting yourself, before anyone else gets the chance to hurt you again. And I just believe, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm going to be a future social worker, but I just believe that when I watch her, I don't see a murderer. I see trauma. I see a trauma survivor. I see a woman who made impossible choices in impossible situations. And yeah, sometimes those choices hurt people, but they can be saved, and you can be saved. I think that she deserves a chance, And I want to talk about the Zion custody move, a reckless alliance with Gil, In season 3, Zion Miller decision to partner with Gil in the custody battle over his daughter Jenny raises serious concerns. Gil is revealed to be an abusive and manipulative individual. His violent history includes physical abuse towards Georgia, just a bunch of horrible things, and I just think that he would have had the worst example or worst influence on Austin. Despite this, Zion chose to align with Gil, a man with a known history of abuse and manipulation. This partnership was not only morally questionable, but also legally, just precautious, I think. Gil abusive past and his attempt to gain custody of Austin despite being just a convicted felon should have been a red flag. Zion's decision to just work with him suggests a lack of judgment and just disregard for the well-being of his daughter. Georgia, on the other hand, has always prioritized her children's safety and well-being, even if her methods were, unconventional. Her actions, although often controversial or stemmed from a desire to protect her family, Zion's alliance with Gil, undermines his protective instinct and raises questions about his, stability as a co-parent. In my opinion, I just stopped liking him from that moment on. I just felt like, oh no, this man is dangerous. Because Zion, why would you do that? Zion claims that he didn't know Gil was abusive. But even if, we have this whole situation happening, and even if he didn't know, you have to give him the benefit of the doubt. That's what people say, because he didn't know, right? But he definitely knew that Gil had been to jail. He knew Gil was a felon if he didn't know anything else, right? And that alone should have been a huge warning sign. Partnering with the man who has that felony charge and trying to get custody of your daughter, it's like you didn't care about Austin. All you cared about was your daughter. And I just felt like that was a reckless move. And Zion should have known better than to team up with someone like Gil, especially knowing the history of Georgia and her kids, had with him. Maybe he didn't know about the abuse, but he knew that this man was a horrible man. And this had happened after, the whole situation between him and Georgia, Georgia wanted to be distanced from him. He had an idea or some idea that this man was a horrible person. Maybe he didn't know to the extent, but he knew he was a horrible person. He's just too blind. He just goes into situations just wanting to believe the best about people instead of accepting people for who they are. And this just wasn't a bad decision. It showed a lack of judgment. And, he put his daughter Jenny in the middle of a toxic situation. Georgia, despite all her flaws, always put her kids first and doing everything to protect them. And Zion's choice to work with Gil, a man with a violent past, just felt like a betrayal to that protection, in my opinion. So yeah, I see Georgia. I don't agree with everything she did, but I see her. And I think more of us would too if we stopped judging her from the outside and started asking, what if it really takes for a woman to do all the things that she did to survive? What does it take for a woman to be able to survive?
Are you actually starting to believe all the bullshit that they are saying about you out there, that you're the victim here? Because you are not the victim. Trust me.
In this world, in a world that's failed her, in a world that's went against her over and over. If you were having the environment that Georgia had, or grew up in that environment, would you have been able to make the same decisions? Would you have been a better person?
Hey, you do not talk to your mother like that. She deserves your respect. Yeah, respect me, you little shit.
Think about it. Just let me know what y'all think. I just really want to know, are you team Georgia? Do you see her as a villain, or can you hold space for her being both someone who's broken but trying to love her kids and the best way, or somebody who have had to make a lot of tough decisions? I think it's worth discussing, and it's worth talking about, and I just think you should drop your thoughts below, subscribe, of course. And if you want to hear more about Jenny and Georgia and all the messy, just real conversation about them, just let me know. Georgia's life is a series of difficult decisions. None of this was easy.
I kept you safe because that hand doesn't stop on the thigh, and I spent my whole childhood wishing my mom would stop that hand.
Or black and white. She wasn't just a bad person, making bad choices. She was a woman doing what she thought was necessary to keep her family safe and to help them survive, you know? So yeah, season 3 showed us that, you know, Georgia is complicated, right? She's a mix of survivor and a little bit of a monster, a little bit. As a future social worker, me, I see the trauma and like the cycles and the, you know, just the desperate attempts to like protect her kids in this broken world. I feel for her, even while I'm calling out, you know, some harsh truths, you know. So I want to know once again what you guys think.
Anger, fury, motherhood.
Not half bad.
You know, are you Team Georgia? Do you see her as a villain? Drop your thoughts below and don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to hear more about my views, once again, let's watch this show. Hit it in the comments and tell me to break down somebody else. I love you guys. Bye.